Hello and welcome to GZERO World. I'm Ian Bremmer, and today is all about what's next for Lebanon, a country on the brink of economic crisis, now reeling from a massive explosion in its capital city. This week, as renewed protests forced the prime minister and his cabinet to resign, I spoke with journalist and Beirut native Kim Ghattas about the city's devastation and its people's rage. By now, you've seen the footage. Nearly 3,000 tons of ammonium nitrate stored in a Beirut warehouse ignited. This was the result. It's not the first time this chemical compound used in fertilizers and mining projects has devastated a city. In 2015, a series of chemical explosions rocked the Chinese port city of Tianjin, leaving 173 people dead. In 1995, Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols used it in the bombing of an Oklahoma City federal building. Back in 1947, a ship in Galveston Bay, Texas, carrying more than 2,000 tons of ammonium nitrate ignited, leaving more than 500 dead. The blast was so ferocious, residents feared it was an atomic bomb. Now, I'm talking about Lebanon and why the timing of this devastating explosion could not have been worse. Even before the blast, mass demonstrations across the country protesting government corruption, a banking crisis, runaway inflation, soaring poverty, and a refugee crisis. In March, as a global pandemic gained momentum as if they needed any other problems, Lebanon was drowning in debt, its credit rating sinking, its economy teetered on the brink of collapse as the World Bank forecast 45% of the country's population would sink below the poverty line. All of that was before a fireball and supersonic shockwave ripped through the capital city, destroying major grain silos and the nation's largest port facility, which handles an estimated 60% of Lebanon's imports. Lebanon purchases nearly all of its wheat from abroad, and fears of food scarcity are now growing. Meanwhile, the hospital staff, already stretched by coronavirus, now have to deal with many of the over 5,000 people injured by the blast. Another 250,000 Lebanese have been made homeless. Thousands have taken to the streets in protest of a government in whom they have lost confidence. And they're already seeing results. Just this week, Lebanon's prime minister and his cabinet resigned. A formal investigation is underway, and though it's too early to point fingers, at least officially, it's unclear why that much explosive material was left in a warehouse near downtown Beirut for 6 years. What is clear is that this incident has placed immense pressure on a country that was just barely holding on. And it's laid bare the political dysfunction that has paralyzed Lebanon in recent years. To help me explain the bigger picture is Kim Ghattas, an author and journalist born in Beirut and who has covered the region extensively. Great to be with you, Kim.
Thanks for having me, Ian.
Where were you? What were you doing? How did you respond when this extraordinary explosion hit your city?
You know, it was an extraordinary day, Ian, one that none of us really are able to quite comprehend. We've seen the pictures again. We've read the news about our own city, about our own lives being shattered. And yet we still can't quite grasp the enormity, the magnitude of what happened. On that Tuesday, I was in my apartment in the suburbs of Beirut, just on the edge of the center by the National Museum. I live on the 6th floor. And I was supposed to be in the port area, very close to where much of the damage happened, but I was late. And I was distracted by a video that a friend, a journalist, Nabi Boulos, had posted on Twitter of a fire at the port.
Whatever it is, it seems to still be raging.
And then I heard Nabi's voice over that video saying, whatever it is, it's still raging. And suddenly the building where I am, a few kilometers away from the port, started shaking. My brain couldn't compute whether it was some strange effect of the video or what was going on. I thought it was an earthquake. My dog, I have a dog, started running around the house. I grabbed her and pinned her to the floor. And then we heard the noise. A lot of people have commented that they heard the sound of an air raid. And I also did think that it was an air raid. I thought it was an Israeli air raid. But it was the whoosh of the detonation that came all the way to where I live, just a few kilometers away. And the most surreal part of it is that this video on my laptop in my office was still playing. Whatever it is, it's still raging. Whatever it is, it's still raging. And I don't know what was driving me crazier, the sensation of what was happening around us, or that video that was on a loop. But you know, Ian, a week later, whatever it is still raging. The rage in the streets of Beirut is enormous. The anger and the ineptitude, the mismanagement, the corruption of the government is beyond anything that we have seen. We've been through 9 months now of protests, of economic crisis, financial crisis, social crisis, food prices rising, population descending into poverty, all of it because of the inept, corrupt mismanagement of this country. And what I see in terms of rage on the streets of Beirut really tells me that this is a make or break moment for Lebanon. We are in an existential crisis. And the Lebanon of after August 4th will not be the same as the Lebanon before August 4th.
What do you think actually happened? I mean, this incredible amount of unsecured explosive sitting there for years. I mean, at the very least, I saw the head of Hezbollah said it wasn't an Israeli strike, so we can get rid of that conspiracy theory.
No, we can't. We can't even get rid of that conspiracy, actually.
Really? Because in this sort of environment, I mean, huge explosion in Beirut, you would expect there'd be 100,000 different conspiracy theories immediately.
No one wants to dismiss that one just yet. We're not saying, no one here is saying that it was a raid, because although some people said they saw planes, there's been no footage, no confirmation, but it could be sabotage. The thing is, no one wants to claim this. If it was sabotage, if it was an Israeli action, if it was local sabotage for whatever reason, no one wants to claim this, because I don't think anyone expected the damage to be this big. But there are a lot of unanswered questions about how and why this Rosus ship, Russian-owned, Cypriot-owned, Russian captain, ended up diverting to Beirut. The story is not clear. The shipment came from Georgia and was supposed to head to Mozambique. Mozambique said, we didn't order this. We'd already received, I think, 4,000 tons of ammonium nitrate. So who was this destined for? And whoever it was destined for clearly didn't seem too bothered about claiming it. This has been sitting there in this hangar since 2014. And there is too many unanswered questions about what it was doing there. It is indeed very possible that this was simply criminal negligence. But even criminal negligence needs to be punished.
We haven't talked about coronavirus. I mean, one of the first things I thought of when I saw the thousands of people getting injured is, my God, these people are going to need to be treated in hospitals that are already massively overstretched, and it's going to also increase the risk of further transmission of this horrible disease. How has the government, how have the people been reacting to the pandemic itself, and do you see any interaction because of this additional stress?
So the good news so far was that Lebanon had done quite well in containing the pandemic. Hospitals were not overstretched. ICU capacity was still fine. The number of deaths was limited. I like that you said, how did the people respond? Because it is really almost two separate entities. Let me stick with the pandemic for a moment. When it comes to the response to the pandemic, there has been some good government effort. There has been good response from the government hospitals. There's been a lot of incredible response by private hospitals that are stellar. I mean, people come from around the region to be taken care of in Lebanon before the pandemic. We have excellent doctors, nurses, everything, and state-of-the-art medical equipment and state-of-the-art, hospitals. But the stretch, again, was the financial crisis. Hospitals not being able to pay for supplies. The government owing certain hospitals, like the hospital of the American University of Beirut, $150 million. The American hospital of Beirut had to lay off 800 people, in part because it is owed so much money by the government, which is not paying. Now, that's all up until August 4th. The number of cases were starting to rise again, and there were calls to be careful and for society, for people to be wary, to put on their mask. There is a strong response to calls like that in Lebanon. People feel the solidarity. Now, after August 4th, several hospitals were severely damaged, and now they're all overstretched by the number of casualties, 4,000 almost. That's where the urgency is.
And when President Macron came, I mean, on the one hand, wonderful to see a foreign leader pay attention and want to make a positive difference. On the other hand, France, the former imperial power, colonial power in Lebanon, mixed feelings about that?
No.
Positive response generally?
Very
I mean, how does that play?
Very positive. He was the first official to visit the devastated areas. Neither the president nor the prime minister nor anyone had dared gone there yet. So he was the first, and it just shows you how desperate people are for some support, for some recognition, for some empathy, that they threw themselves at him. And there were two things that they said: don't give money to the government, give aid directly to the people, to recognized organizations, to hospitals. And second, we want justice. We want an international investigation. The humanitarian aid that has been pledged so far is fine, but it's been made very clear to the leaders of Lebanon and the political establishment that no further aid will come if there are no serious reforms.
And when the Iranian leaders are speaking about no intervention, is that what they're responding to? The fact that the French and others are saying, we need you to reform if you want our help? Is that what they're taking exception to?
Yes, probably. Look, this is a turning point, not just for Lebanon, but I think it is a very interesting inflection point for the region. We must remember the protests that took place in Iraq since October, the protests that have been taking place on and off in Iran. I talk about this in my book, Ian Black Wave, where I describe the rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia over the last 40 years. A lot of this is local dynamics, local corruption, local sectarianism, local issues, but it is also part of a regional context where something is unraveling and coming to an end. And we don't know yet which way it's going to go, but something is unraveling. And I think that the maximum pressure that is being applied on Iran is making Tehran wonder how this is going to play out for them. And they're watching their ally in Lebanon, Hezbollah, probably feeling cornered.
Here in the United States, the president hasn't said much. Originally said it was a bomb. That created a bit of a firestorm here, then backed away from it.
But they seem to think it was a attack. It was a bomb of some kind, yes.
But has been some announcement of financial aid participating in the broader international effort. Anything you'd like to see from the U.S. that you're not seeing?
I think the Lebanese people want to see words of support for the Lebanese people. I think they want to make sure that no one extends another lifeline to the current political establishment and the current political factions. So whether it's President Trump or President Emmanuel Macron or the Prime Minister of the UK, Boris Johnson, I think the message from the Lebanese people is this is a turning point for the country. No one wants a military intervention. No one is calling for that. That's not where we are. We are ready as Lebanese people to build our own future. And we want the world to hold the leaders to account. We want an international investigation. And we want international support and aid for the people and pressure for true reforms in this country.
Frequently in situations where the economy falls apart and people feel that there's no one for them, they turn to more radical answers, and organizations like Hezbollah end up doing better in that environment. You don't see that happening in Lebanon right now?
I don't. I don't know if I'm naive, but I don't. I don't think that they can increase their popular base. They might do better if the country descends into chaos, because groups like that thrive in chaos. Look at Syria, look at Iraq. Hezbollah is a local Lebanese political party, but it is also a militant group armed to the teeth with the backing of Iran that has decided and taken it upon itself to wage wars in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen. And the Lebanese are fed up with that. They want to be left alone. They don't want to be dragged into other people's wars. And they feel to some extent hostage to that party, which has a lot of veto power in a lot of the country's decisions, including in the management of key infrastructure, like the port.
Kim, I mean, as someone who loves Beirut very much, and a place that is so cosmopolitan, and the government, but also the culture, the food, the music, they all bringing together Christians, Sunni, Shia. Do you see that same level of unity, of purpose and engagement of everyone together with these demonstrations, or not?
You know, unity is very difficult in moments like these because people will all want to put forward their vision for how the government has to go forward. And we're not a united country. We are divided to some extent because we are Christian, Muslim, Shia, Sunni, Protestant, Catholic, etc. We are expatriates, diaspora, long-time residents. All social classes, etc. But we are, I think, a majority united in wanting a different future, a future that is non-sectarian, that is non-corrupt, that provides prosperity, justice, dignity for people. I think this is the minimum that everyone almost can agree on. What is going to be very difficult is to determine exactly how to get there. And it is hard to coalesce. Over the last 9 months, as we've been saying, there have been massive protests in the country. And then the COVID pandemic gave a lifeline to the government. Everybody had to stay indoors. And that kind of meant that the protests petered out, a little bit like in Iran and in Iraq. What did not happen in the months preceding the lockdowns was the emergence of a unified leadership for the opposition. And there are many reasons for that. People wanted it to be an egalitarian opposition. They wanted it to be horizontal, grassroots. And they didn't want opposition leaders to rise, because in the past, opposition leaders have been targets of assassination. We have lost many of our potential leaders of the future in this country in a wave of assassinations that started in 2005 and before. But going back to the cosmopolitanism, Ian, we pride ourselves in being a melting pot. We pride ourselves in having welcomed Armenians and Palestinians and Syrians and having hosted them and housed them with a lot of pain for the country as well. We're home to 1.5 million refugees in a country of barely 5 million. We've been home to several 100,000 Palestinian refugees since 1948. But this is our strength. It is also to some extent our weakness, but it is our strength. And so is our resilience and our ability to constantly rebuild no matter what happens. But today, Ian, the Lebanese don't want to just rebuild so that it can be destroyed again. They want to live.
Kim Ghattas, thank you so much for joining me. Wishing you only the best.
Thank you so much for having me, Ian.
That's our show this week. Come back next week, and if you like what you see, and of course you do, because otherwise why would we spend all this time together? Because we like each other. Take a minute to sign up for GZERO's most excellent morning newsletter, Signal.